been on that MSNBC, mate. It was propagandist nutcrackery on there. I went on a show called Morning Joe. It was absurd the way they carried on.
Good Morning Joe.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It wasn't morning. There was no one called Joe there. No one could concentrate. They didn't understand the basic tenets of journalism. No one was willing to stick up for genuine American heroes.
Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know.
Bill Maher didn't just argue with an MSNBC pundit. He snapped, and the crowd went silent. And that silence, it wasn't awkward. It was a verdict. Because in that moment, Maher exposed not just one pundit, but an entire media machine that's been running on excuses instead of reality. What unfolded wasn't just a fiery exchange. It was a live demonstration of how badly the mainstream misunderstands American voters. And the receipts from this moment are brutal. The debate began with one of the oldest excuses in the political playbook: sexism and racism.
Someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the middle of the top of the ticket, 3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Okay, but I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short a period of time? Are they all so much brighter than America? I don't think so.
Pundits love to toss it out when Democrats lose, but Maher wasn't having it. He said flat out, Americans are ready to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last ones who ran. Period. Then came his shot at MSNBC. Maher mocked the network's coverage as propagandist nutcrackery, recounting his own chaotic experiences on shows like Morning Joe. He roasted it by saying there was no morning, no Joe, and no journalism, just noise. The audience cracked up, but beneath the humor was a serious jab at the collapse of trust in legacy media. Maher wasn't just cracking jokes. He was laying out the foundation. People are tired of excuses, tired of spin, and tired of being talked down to. And he was just getting warmed up. From there, Maher shifted to the Democrats' strategy for reaching voters. According to him, the left clung to outlets like MSNBC and CNN, essentially preaching to the choir. Meanwhile, Trump went straight to massive neutral platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Theo Von's show, grabbing millions of viewers that weren't already locked into partisan bubbles. That's not just strategy, that's dominance. And when the legacy TV approach failed, Democrats pivoted to desperation. Endless text blasts, constant donation emails, strangers banging on your door. It felt less like campaigning and more like harassment.
You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty to put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
A Democrat would have needed to run away from
Bill,
the
I don't know if you know this, but the Vice President of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody?
You are.
Maher himself joked about being spammed every 5 minutes. Instead of adapting to where people actually are, on YouTube, podcasts, and independent shows, they doubled down on methods that annoyed people. Maher's argument cut deep. You can't win hearts and minds by nagging people on their phones when your opponent is out there having free-flowing 3-hour conversations with millions. One side is connecting, the other is pestering. and the difference showed up in the results. Then came the core of the debate. Kamala Harris. MSNBC pundit John Heilemann argued she wasn't given enough time, only 3 months, to define herself after Biden dropped out. He claimed the clock was stacked against her and that no candidate could pull it off. Maher shut that down instantly. He said, voters already knew Harris, and the truth was, they just didn't like her. The problem wasn't time, it was the candidate herself. Maher pointed out that other nations manage decisive elections in weeks. America didn't suddenly forget how to recognize a leader in 90 days. Heilemann tried to paint Harris as a victim, even comparing her to female CEOs set up to fail when companies were already in trouble. But Maher wasn't letting that narrative slide. He reminded everyone that Biden himself had once promised to be a bridge candidate. Instead, he clung to power until the party was cornered. By the time Harris was elevated, voters already had an opinion of her. And it wasn't flattering. It was a brutal reality check. But Maher wasn't done. He was about to pull his strongest move yet. Maher turned to the audience and threw out a question that cut through all the spin. How many of you feel like you don't know enough about Kamala Harris to decide whether to vote for her? The crowd froze. Silence. Not one hand went up. Not a single voice spoke. The pause stretched, heavy and undeniable. That silence was louder than any applause. It was proof, in real time, that the MSNBC talking point was garbage. Voters weren't undecided about Harris. They already knew her. They just didn't connect with her, didn't trust her, didn't want her. For Heilemann, it was devastating. His whole argument collapsed on stage. No spin could cover the fact that even a friendly audience wasn't buying it. Maher didn't just argue. He let the silence destroy the narrative for him. From there, Maher expanded the scope. The real problem wasn't Harris's timeline. It was the Democrats' obsession with optics over competence. Instead of elevating the strongest leaders based on ideas and ability, they leaned into identity politics, believing that picking a black female VP would automatically win over voters. But people saw through it. Representation matters, but not as a substitute for leadership. Voters care about inflation, crime, border security, and rising living costs. They're not interested in symbolic gestures if the real issues go unsolved. Maher argued that Americans want competence, vision, and action, not box-checking and photo ops. By betting on identity alone, Democrats underestimated the intelligence of the electorate. And that miscalculation turned into a backlash. The silence of the crowd was about more than Harris. It was about the entire strategy of putting image over substance. If Heilemann thought the humiliation was over, Maher doubled down by pointing to others who had called out MSNBC. Russell Brand once shredded the network too, labeling it pure propaganda. He mocked Morning Joe as a circus where no one seemed to understand journalism, much less practice it. This echoed Maher's point perfectly. MSNBC and outlets like it are stuck in an echo chamber. They recycle the same narratives, defend the same excuses, and avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. And every time their pundits walk onto Maher's stage, they get dismantled. Because real-time debate doesn't allow for echo chamber spin. It's why these moments go viral. People are sick of canned talking points. They want honesty, even if it stings. And when Maher cuts through the excuses, it resonates far beyond the studio audience. By the end of the segment, Maher had done far more than humiliate an MSNBC pundit. He ripped the curtain back on the deeper problem eating away at the Democratic Party and its media allies. What he exposed was bigger than one debate or one bad candidate. It was about a political culture addicted to excuses, obsessed with identity plays, and blind to the fact that voters aren't as gullible as they think. Excuses don't put food on the table. Slogans don't make streets safer. Spin doesn't pay rent. Ordinary Americans know exactly what they're living through, and no amount of glossy messaging can erase that reality. That unforgettable silence from the audience, it wasn't just awkward. It was damning. It was a living, breathing reminder that Americans didn't need more time to get to know Kamala Harris. They already knew her track record, her positions, her public image, and they had already judged her. The silence was a verdict, and it rang louder than any applause line could. It proved voters aren't confused or uninformed. They're discerning, and they're not afraid to reject what doesn't work for them. The bigger takeaway is crystal clear. As long as Democrats keep hiding inside media bubbles, pumping out talking points, and underestimating the intelligence of the electorate, they'll keep losing. And Bill Maher, armed with nothing more than blunt honesty and sharp wit, will keep exposing the gap between spin and reality. So if you enjoyed watching the excuses crumble in real time, don't just nod along. Hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up. Because if this exchange is any sign of what's ahead, the next political takedown will be even more brutal, and you're not going to want to miss it.